Today is July 13th, 2023, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong Motan in 2020. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler and I are delighted to host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everybody who negotiates. As you know, there's no charge for these great webinars. Rather, we ask people to contribute to a food bank if they like what they see. And our audiences have been so generous in supporting food banks worldwide in honor of our great speakers. I'm delighted to inform you, and every week it's one of the highlights of the program to inform you of the running total of just how much people have contributed since we began the series. Today, our running total is the amazing number of $415,233.57. Thank you all so much for your generosity. Today, we have another terrific program on a different sort of topic, on the role of legal journalism in the era of social media. And who better to present that than Meghann Cuniff? Meghann is a journalist who operates www.legalaffairsandtrials.com. I'll tell you that I'm a paid subscriber and I recommend it to everybody. The journalism is tremendous. After Meghann graduated from the University of Oregon, she worked at the Spokesman Review in Spokane, Washington, and the Idaho Statesman in Boise, Idaho, before moving to California in 2013 to work at the Orange County Register. Since then, Meghann has worked at the Los Angeles Daily Journal, where she and I first met each other. She's worked for ALM/law.com and Law and Crime News. Her coverage of rapper Tony Lanez's trial for shooting Megan Thee Stallion has earned national attention. So questions are, what relevance is it to mediators, and what relevance is it as citizens and people who are consumers of news as well? What do we need to know, and how can we help? Meghann Cuniff, please tell us a little bit about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're in a position to do so. And then on with the presentation. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'm asking people if they can to donate to family ministries. It's in San Clemente, my neighborhood, and Family Assistance Ministries. I'm sure they'd love your donations. So thanks everyone for being here today. I thought it would be interesting to kind of look at how we got to where we are in 2023 in the age of social media and legal affairs journalism, because it's been such a changing, ever evolving thing since I've basically been growing up with it. I'm at the age of youngish people who grew up with the internet a little bit, but not in the era of how some people know it. We didn't have social media until I was in college. Senior year of University of Oregon, when we were at the student paper, is when Facebook came out. So we were getting involved with it then. And it wasn't anything that we used to really promote or report on. We would share links to our articles or something like that, but it was really more of a reporting tool for us, just to, see what people were saying, things like that. We, of course, had no idea that it would become an entire new platform, and basically in some ways almost replace the traditional newspaper website as a way of sharing information. So my perspective on it is a bit unique, because back in 2008, I worked at a paper up in Spokane, Washington, that was forward thinking in this kind of stuff, or at least tried to be. It was, in the end, it's all just kind of experimentation, but Twitter was new in that era, and there was a big high-profile case going on in the Spokane area. It was a federal prosecution of, actually it was a triple murder case that was prosecuted in state court, but there were two kids who were kidnapped and taken over to Montana, and one of them was killed, and it was prosecuted in federal court. It was a federal death penalty case. And he actually pleaded guilty, but the death penalty phase was going on before the jury. And this was probably the biggest case, definitely the biggest trial to come out of Idaho in, the Spokesman Review's history, but really in the history of Spokane too. It was really, really up there. And it was a federal death penalty case, which you just don't see very often. They had moved it to Boise, Idaho, where we had a bureau reporter who, Idaho Press Club president, she's retired now, but she's a real pioneer for open courts, advocacy in courts. And we had a new platform of Twitter, and it was like, how do we try to use this? And it was at the time where I can't claim to be the first person to ever use it to report from a courtroom, because there were people, other reporters in smaller papers doing it, just sharing updates from different trials in Kansas, that kind of thing. So we thought that it would be a good medium to just basically experiment with it. And we had an editor at the Spokesman Review who was willing to experiment like that. So we had Betsy Russell, the veteran reporter, in the courtroom, and then they actually sent me from I was in the Idaho office in Coeur d'Alene at the time, down to Boise to report on the trial via Twitter. So this was, I think, in the first year or two that Twitter had been out. It was still very, very new. I think they allowed 280 characters or 280 characters. It was fewer characters now. When you see the tweets, they're very short. So I went through and found some of the tweets that I had. I thought it was interesting to bring up the first one that I ever had, and this is it right here. And looking back, I kind of cringe that I'm juxtapositioning this death penalty trial that's starting with like a salad that I'm eating in Boise. But I was young, and it was kind of like, how do you use social media and what are you sharing on here? And I remember in the very beginning, it seemed like Twitter was about, social media was about sharing pictures of what you were eating and then talking to celebrities on there. So sharing coverage of a trial was a new thing for us. And I remember what we did was actually not have it on my page. We had it on the main Spokesman Review page. I took over the account and tweeted from there. So we had, when I went through last night to find some reaction, we had some old reaction to this from accounts in the Spokane area. And I said, I think this one's interesting. This is way out there. They're giving us a play-by-play straight from the trial. And obviously this was very, very new to people. I mean, they're just tweeting the fact that we're doing this. And then, and we were getting some of this too. Spokesman Review was getting unfollowed for a while. And there was a controversy within the newsroom about whether we were kind of cheapening the coverage of a federal death penalty trial about a children's kidnapping and murder by just tweeting out these details on a website called Twitter, which people thought was kind of silly. But it was just kind of an example of the newspaper trying to keep up with the times and do, what we could to try to survive. And the reaction was, it seemed well. We can see the tweets about, I was struck by that. What does polling mean? I mean, Duncan was a serial killer who actually was convicted of killing a kid down in Riverside County too after this. So to see that tweet back in the day saying, what does polling mean? I mean, it's kind of an example of the personal look inside the courtroom that you can get. But there's always different policies on whether to even allow this inside the courtroom. And this was back in 2008 in Boise, Idaho's senior judge Edward Lodge, who's now retired, and he didn't allow any kind of electronics at all in the courtroom, but they did set up an overflow courtroom, which is where it wasn't even a courtroom. It was like a conference room where they'd set up an audio feed, and we were allowed to do electronic transmissions from there, which, I mean, looking back, that was what, 15 years ago. We don't even have some of those allowances now. I mean, it's just completely by judge and by court. But one advantage that we had was Betsy Russell, the reporter who was covering it full time, was so well established in Boise and had such a good relationship with the courts. And she was just such a hound about things. She could just be persistent about public access and get that. So I remember we what I remember was this actually isn't the end of the trial. This is mid-trial. This was only after a few days they decided to send me back up to Spokane, and it was, it was just like, oh, this was just an experiment for a while. We might send you back for a little bit. But one note I've always saved, and I'm like, this is kind of interesting in the social media area, especially the way it was written, was I think this was my boss just kind of trying to lessen the blow of, you're not going to be able to cover the whole trial. And he wanted to make sure I didn't think it was because I was doing a bad job or something. But he sent me this note that he had this typewriter that he would type out notes, and sorry if it's a little hard to read here, but just said, just wanted you to know that you've done an amazing job working the Duncan trial this week. Twitter was an experiment for us, but you have proven the concept. So, I mean, this was back when, like he said, Twitter was just a concept. And it was like, how do you use this and build an audience and inform the public and enhance your journalism? And I think that to this day is still a debate, because I remember when I went back to the newsroom and we had a discussion about this, people were excited about the thrill or the interest of getting real-time updates like that. But my point was, I mean, why don't we try to replicate this technology on our own website if we're just sharing microblogging updates? And you'll see the New York Times has that built into NewYorkTimes.com, where their reporters are tweeting, or they're not tweeting, but they're sharing live updates on the platform. But of course, one advantage to Twitter and these social mediums, especially over the last 15 years, is they've just gotten such a huge, massive audience to it. But at the time, and I think still, there's always a question of why are we spending all this time writing for a website that's not our own website? I mean, isn't the whole idea of having a website and reporting news on the internet is you're trying to get traffic to your news organization's website, because hopefully they're going to subscribe, or there's page views and advertising, things that come with that. So that's always been an internal struggle within the newsrooms for how you deal with that. And early on, I had started a blog at the Spokesman Review. It was kind of the early version of Legal Affairs and Trials with Meghann Cuniff. I called it Sirens and Gavels. And I loved this blog. I mean, I was like 25 when I started it, and it was just a platform for me to take all the stuff that I couldn't include in my Spokesman Review stories and have like a dumping ground for cops and courts coverage in the Spokane area. And as I explained in my birthday post back in, what was that, 2010, it started because we'd gotten a notice about a registered sex offender moving to a new address in Spokane, and his convictions were jaw-dropping, and he had like devil tattoos all over his face. So, it was like, maybe we can provide a little more coverage beyond just the newspaper story for this. So my goal with Twitter use at the time was to basically just drive traffic to the website. That there were other trials that we covered even like 3 years later, where this was down in Boise again. It was a white supremacist lawyer who was convicted of hiring his handyman to kill his wife and mother-in-law. And I went down there, and we were actually allowed to tweet from the courtroom. But again, it was when it didn't feel like a huge traffic builder, and it was like, don't we want to just be moving traffic to our website? So that's basically what I was doing. But then fast forward to just last December, when the rappers trial was happening, Tory Lanez for shooting Megan Thee Stallion. This is obviously a lot of years later from when we were first using social media, and the traffic here is just crazy. I mean, a lawyer who'd been following my coverage of Michael Avenatti's trial and various trials on Twitter, texted me when this was going on and just said the numbers on these Tory Lanez tweets are astonishing. I mean, look how many people are interacting with this. And it's such a huge, I mean, there's so much to this, because when you just look at the death of newspapers, but the rise of social media, it's like, wow, people are hungrier than ever for news, and especially, I think, courts news. And that's what I found with the Tory Lanez case, was that this was there's huge interest in these people as celebrities. They both maximize the celebrity blogs and the social media traffic over the last 3 years, and there really wasn't an authoritative voice reporting on it at all. I mean, we've got two huge mainstream newspapers, the Washington Post and New York Times, who seem like they cover everything when you see the national reporting that they do. But here is a really big court case that has so much interest, and you're just not seeing that much coverage of it. So what I was struck by in the very beginning was just how people seem to appreciate, knowledge of the court system, just being able to say, I mean, basic things like who the witness is and what's going on in court. So if you can get that traffic from this website or from Twitter, committed to following you, it's like, how do you use this to kind of teach people about the court system and report news? And I'm still trying to. I think that's always just a work in progress, but I think the Tory Lanez case is the biggest sign of almost the failings of mainstream newspapers in covering legal affairs journalism, because there's such interest in this. I mean, this tweet, and sorry for the poor language if I'm, if we're being a little too salty here for some people, but this was, I mean, I was astonished at the interactions on this. Almost 18,000 likes, 12.1 million views. And I've told people, I think this is a really good courtroom reaction tweet, because it exemplifies reporting something not for the truth of the matter, but to establish state of mind. It's not like when she told me this, I said, okay, I need to go report, and so people know this about Jay-Z. It's like, no, this created a scene of what was going on in the courtroom right after he'd been convicted. I mean, all hell was breaking loose, and there were people who were just shocked he would ever be convicted. Dad was carrying on, and this woman turned around and said that, and the reason she said that is because Meghann Thee Stallions is friends with Jay-Z. Her management company is Rock Nation, so there's a whole conspiracy about how Jay-Z is behind that. But the people that you're reaching with this, and people have kind of said, oh, you take me inside the courtroom with your tweets, and that's something that I don't think we really had before the era of social media. We had really good, thorough courtroom reporting, but just this kind of instantaneous stuff that can really draw people in, I think is just so new, and we're just learning how to figure it out, not only as a society, but just as journalists. Like I said, just how to shepherd all this. So the attention from this resulted in, I mean, my name was trending nationally on Twitter, and it was, kind of making the journalists like part of the, the celebrity aspect of it. But it was a big eye opener for me for all the different mediums out there in the different social media eras, because there's so much gossip and celebrityism surrounding this one court case that there are actually YouTubers and YouTube channels who will make entire Tory Lanez videos, and they've been analyzing it, but they don't have the ability, they just don't know how to read the court documents or actually do any reporting. So it's kind of just gossip stuff. So when I show up, it took me a while to kind of realize this was going on, but I'm becoming like a topic of conversation amongst these celebrity blogs. I mean, I'm being cited all the time. Anything Tory Lanez I get cited on, but there's YouTubers who were going to the trial and then doing updates afterward, and I wasn't really paying attention to it at the time, because as a traditional reporter reporting for law and crime, I've got an article to write, I'm trying to get tweets out, I barely have time to interact with all the interaction I'm getting, let alone look at other people's interaction. But I've realized that the people who are going there and doing their live updates on YouTube, some of them are hugely successful. I mean, if you look at this, the page views, these aren't, 54, that's nothing, 39, but 54K, and I'll pass out on some of that. We don't need to give that too much airtime. But what I learned is they don't call themselves journalists. They'll kind of pass themselves off as media bloggers and that kind of thing. But it is YouTube is a whole medium of people who are making money off this stuff, and they're actually making making pretty huge money. I'll see if I can pull up some YouTube channels, but it's a little dangerous when you get into the YouTube stuff, because you never know, like, if there's going to be some, especially in the Tory Lanez era, when I was getting a ton of interactions on Twitter, I would see some of the big accounts retweeting me. I'm like, oh my God, this is like a porn account. I'm like, oh, well, I don't be offended. They're just interested in their Tory and Meg news. Like that's all it is. But it really opened me up to this whole new world of the internet. And one guy, Armand Wiggins, is he's a media personality on YouTube, full-time YouTube. He goes live, and all of a sudden, after, if he does a notification, and he has, I think, 200,000 subscribers on his YouTube channel, he does a notification that he's live, goes live. He has a whole studio set up and an intro that's like, get in here, everybody get in here. He's waiting for people to get into his YouTube. All of a sudden, he's got 20,000 people watching him on live. I told him, I was like, the LA Times would kill for this kind of traffic. What's going on with them selling the San Diego paper and laying off their entire digital desk because they're billionaire owners getting to sell them? I mean, mainstream media has not gotten it figured out. And the LA Times has the good journalism background and the reporting tools. But like I said, if the LA Times did a live right now, they would not get 20,000 people in 2 minutes watching them. And the fact that Armand Wiggins can do that is, I mean, I don't want to, it's impressive. But when you look at the medium that he's doing, it's like shock jock stuff. I mean, this is YouTube, gossip. He's just fanning the flames on stuff. And it was really contributing to some of the problems in the coverage of the Tory Lanez case, because I would be amazed that, I sat through opening statements, heard all the details about the shooting where he fired 5 rounds at her as she's like walking away from him. And all the focus on the gossip blogs was like one line in opening statements about how Meghann also used to date this rapper or something like that. It's all about these, relationships and shock jock stuff. So it was a little overwhelming to deal with at first, because it's like, do you ignore this, or do you, I mean, how as traditional journalists do you try to kind of try to live with these YouTubers? And I think basically you just have to ignore them, but ignore their content, don't respond personally. But I think we have a lot to learn in mainstream media from the people who are doing that kind of reporting. And that's one thing I'm trying to do with my website, legalaffairsandtrials.com, is start doing more video reporting through YouTube and do more discussions about different topics in the legal community, because I think that's one, there's a way to utilize these social media places and not lose your what makes journalism and not lose your professionalism. I mean, there's YouTube channels out there that aren't shock jock channels. So it was just kind of an idea of just kind of a question of how do we learn from this, and how do we still keep our integrity and respect in reporting. And that's one thing that I've just still kind of working on through the whole thing. And I mean, right now I'm kind of dealing with the fact that Tory actually, or somebody, he's in jail right now, but somebody on his Instagram account last night, actually on the stories wrote about me. They said, with all due respect, I don't want you guys to read anything that Meghann Cuniff writes or something. And my biggest complaint is he spelled my name wrong, and he didn't @ my account, because I told somebody, somebody warned me, oh, you're going to get harassed over this. I said, I'm actually not getting hardly any interaction over this. I only wish he'd added me. It kind of goes back to the idea of there's no such thing as bad publicity kind of thing. But I mean, one thing I try to keep an eye on is just all the other stories out there. And that'd be one thing I'm always interested in, is just what people are reading and what people are consuming. Because I'd like to think that my targeted audience for legalaffairsandtrials.com is lawyers. And I like the approach of the Daily Journal, the news base that they cover, and just kind of the message that was kind of drilled into me of, lawyers are interested in what their colleagues are doing. They're interested in big cases. They're interested in what's going on in court. They want to read about other judges. So I've kind of, other lawyers and judges that they might appear before. So I've kind of tried to keep that in mind with legalaffairsandtrials.com, and keep that in mind through trying to make that kind of reporting more accessible to the mainstream. But I'm trying to think of how it's really kind of evolved over the years. The first case that I probably covered was just an assignment case up in Kootenai County, Idaho, when I was with the Spokesman Review. It was a road rage murder case. Looking back, I'm like, that was a crazy case. But he'd gotten in two cars had gotten in a back and forth and were following each other all over back roads. And it was two young women in one car and an older guy with a criminal record in another car. And the two young girls in the car ended up calling their parents to complain about him. The parents came up in an SUV and were chasing him and firing shots at him. They actually were the ones who had the gun. They fired shots at him, and the woman was outside the car. And while the shots were being fired at this guy, he ran over the woman and she died. And they prosecuted him for murder because of it. And of course, his defense was that it was self-defense, that he was being shot at and he drove away to avoid the bullets. But he ended up being convicted. But that was, they sent me over to cover the cop's testimony on that or something. And it was very, we weren't tweeting or anything like that. It was before Twitter was around, but it was just like, go over to the courthouse, listen to this guy's testimony, and then write an article about it. So looking back, it was a very good fundamental way to kind of learn cops and courts reporting, because it was inverted pyramid style. I had editors. There were people at the Spokesman Review who'd been there way longer than me. I used to spend hours just looking through the archives for stories, because you would fall down rabbit holes looking up people's names, and then you'd see all these stories from back in the day. So I have that kind of fundamental reporting that I don't think that I think is really lacking in some of the YouTube channels. And one thing I've been dealing with recently is just all the attention on YouTube, and somebody did point it out. I mean, you don't really have to say this, but the YouTubers have been covering the Tory Lanez trial have just been clamoring for attention for the last 3 years. I mean, they've been obsessed with the case since its inception. They are trying to make money off it on their YouTube channel. Somebody told me that the attention that I got during the trial, I mean, you saw the numbers on those tweets, that's beyond their wildest dreams. So it's not, I mean, the idea that they are, saying, oh, Megann's a biased reporter, they're just jealous. I mean, they're clearly just jealous. But Armand was a little bit of a beast to deal with, because I was notified of some YouTube video that he was doing about me that had like 55,000 views. And it's like, Armand, there's a point between when do you ignore this stuff and when do you respond? But it's funny because he goes back and forth between gossiping about stuff and then wondering why he's not taken seriously as a journalist. And I've tried to explain that, you don't just go on the scene right away and cover a high profile trial. Like it's better to get, some kind of fundamental background from this. So I feel like that's what I have from, the Daily Journal was a good place to really get to know the legal community. And that is one thing that I'm sure David Houston would still talk about it to this day, that he hates Twitter and he hates social media. And because, I mean, especially for a subscription publication like the Daily Journal, they just kind of just don't see the point of it. I mean, it was like what I was going back to 14 years ago with, why are we writing for this website that's not our website? And usually the whole idea, especially right now, is to, build traffic to your own website. But when you're a subscription paper like the Daily Journal, there's no point in trying to get, Twitter traffic to a website when they're not going to subscribe. So for 4 years or 5 years, I was kind of in a silo on that. And then almlaw.com is a lot more opening and receptive to social media, but it was just kind of a small audience. So Law and Crime News is really when we really got into the mainstream, when my account really got into the mainstream. And it was after the Michael Avenatti coverage. That was, I think, the big attention getter, because like when we went back to the 14 years ago, just the interest in the fact that the Spokesman Review was tweeting the death penalty phase of a trial. I think there was interest in the Orange County, LA legal community when I started live tweeting the Michael Avenatti case. It was like, wow, you can just go to your phone and, she's got the objections, and there's kind of this lively back and forth. So it was, kind of building an audience through through that. But it was just now it's just figuring out how to harness that audience and keep it on your own website, and then figure out, what people are interested in stories. And like I said, with the law and crime news coverage that I've done through, Harvey Weinstein's trial, Danny Masterson's trial, there was a 2-month period where I was going up to LA Superior Court for the simultaneous celebrity sexual assault trials. And it was high profile, or it was getting attention in the mainstream, but I've always kind of wondered, what is the interest in the legal community in those cases? And one advantage of legalaffairsandtrials.com is just metrics and readership numbers that I can see, because I was kind of concerned if the Tory Lanez coverage or the Danny Masterson coverage, these Superior Court celebrity cases, how much interest is there from federal practitioners, or a partner at Arel and Manella? Is he going to want to read a story about Tory Lanez's, sentencing being delayed or something? And what I've found is that they're actually the most read stories. And I think it's just because if you could cover things from a legal standpoint, but still have kind of a mainstream appeal to it, you can get both lawyers and, rap artists or fans of rap music or something who are interested in all that. So for me, it's been learning how to balance the attention on that, the ongoing coverage on that, and then still covering other things, because I don't want to be known as the hip hop community lawyer or the celebrity trial lawyer. I really like covering the federal cases that nobody else is covering, the LA corruption cases, the kind of watchdog stories about judges. It's what are we interested in as a society and as lawyers to try to do. So one example of a story really taking off on social media. This was before I had the big Tory Lanez following, because it took me, I think people have talked about the time it takes to build a following on Twitter. But like I said, I was on Twitter in 2008, and it took me 14 years, I think, to get up to 11,000 followers or something. And the Avenatti case was the first big surge. I remember I got 2,000 followers overnight, and that was, kind of a big thing. But again, it took me a while to get up to almost 12,000. The Tory Lanez case, I got 3,000 followers in an hour covering that. And I remember when the moment they announced that they had a verdict, and I tweeted that, and then the hour and a half that went by from when we actually came out of the courtroom and I tweeted what the verdict was, I gained 15,000 followers just in that hour and a half. And I ended up with 70,000. So it was, it's just kind of a matter of maintaining the audience and not what are you going to do with this, and where are you going to traffic it in, and what are they actually interested in. So what I've tried to do is still cover what I always covered before, the cases with lawyers, cases with judges. And one, because was saying, other than the Avenatti case, one big thing that really took off a while ago was it just had the mainstream appeal, but was Judge Wright in LA federal court. There was a sex trafficking case, and they were on trial, and it was the federal defender who, she was going back and forth with him, trying to say that she wanted a mistrial because the defendant had been seen in handcuffs by the jury, and the judge didn't believe that the jury had actually seen it. And he ended up saying that he couldn't believe anything that she said, and he actually recused himself from the case. And the order on it was pretty short and sweet, and he actually said that in the order that, I've lost the ability to trust anything that defense counsel says. So when I put that on Twitter, it really took off, and we got, it was the most attention a tweet had gotten before the Tory Lanez case that I saw. So it was kind of a good reminder of kind of the interest in kind of watchdogging the judiciary, and almost the benefit you have of having a testing ground for a story. Because sometimes you'll see something like that, and you're planning on writing about it, but there's not enough for a story, or you're just not really sure what an angle, but you'll put it on Twitter, and you'll kind of realize it'll kind of get a life of its own and kind of grow from there. And I think that's what we've seen, especially in the growth of Twitter in the last 6 or 7 years is the way it kind of controls the news cycle and the East Coast news cycle, the mainstream news cycle, how you can put something on there and kind of dominate the news day. But as I think people have seen with what's going on with Elon Musk and everything, that people are getting away from that more. I mean, people are backing off of Twitter, and the idea that it would ever be, the catch-all, or that it would be forever is of course fading. So people are trying to move away from it. And like I said, it goes back to what I was saying to the Spokesman Review staff in 2008. It's like, why are we putting all our time writing for this website that's not our website? So if we can keep the traffic on legal affairs and trials.com through Substack, which I think is really the niche that Substack owns. In the last couple of years, a lot of reporters have gone through that, because I myself have just been trying to figure out how to utilize the big social media following that I have. And with newspapers dying and laying everyone off, and you see Armand Wiggins making a living off his Shock Jock channel. Said, how can I, how can I figure out how to do that? If I'd had that all set up during the Tory Lanez trial, I mean, you can make a lot of money going on YouTube Live just through, they have ad revenue for, if you enable ads in your lives and the people are watching, they see the ads, you're making money from YouTube through that. But there's also something called, they've got super features or something like that. It's all about becoming a partner in the YouTube channel and getting set up through that. But I was talking about it with another journalist he was editor of the Village Voice in New York City back in 1995. He's got tons of experience, but he's a Scientology reporter, Tony Ortega. I met him covering Danny Masterson's trial in LA, because Masterson's a Scientologist, but he's been doing the Substack thing for subscription website, hoping that people pay, but putting a lot of it out for free. He also has his own YouTube channel, and he's doing it longer than me. He's more established. So I was just talking to him about, tips on how to get set up on that. And he was just talking about the poaching that goes on. And we've seen that with, I see that with the Tory Lanez case, kind of the regurgitation of the stories. But people will, if I tweet something like yesterday, Tory was in court, people will take screenshots of that and put it on their own YouTube channel and do their own streams on it. So they're just sitting in their garages or, their parents' basement is the saying, and kind of making money off my reporting. And Tony was just talking about his own experiences with that, flying from New York to LA, going to the courthouse every day to cover the trial. And then there's a Scientology guy. He has way more subscribers on his channel, and he's just kind of shameless in how he's willing to monetize it, because Tony was saying that he can't stand the idea of charging someone to ask him a question. But YouTube makes it so if you're a member of the partnership program and you're doing these streams about cases that you're covering or something, if people are commenting, to get their comment highlighted or to get it more attention, they can pay $10, $20 or something, and it comes up. And people, and Tony said that he was watching the stream of the guy's YouTube channel is growing up in Scientology. He doesn't even try to be a journalist. I wouldn't call him a shock jock like Armand Wiggins, but he's basically just reading Tony's reporting on air. He's monetizing Tony's own reporting, and he's willing to let people give him, $400 or something to highlight their comment on his YouTube channel. So Tony said he was watching it with his wife, and his wife was like, "Come on, honey, you gotta get in on this." And he just said, "I just have like kind of a problem with expecting people to pay me money to ask me a question." And it goes back to the fact that he's actually a journalist. Like I said, he was the editor of the Village Voice back in the 90s. He has tons of real reporting experience, whereas the guy who runs the Growing Up in Scientology YouTube channel is not a journalist, has no kind of training or background, wouldn't even try to say that he's a journalist. But they're really getting a huge audience. And to say that they're not, you can't say they're not taking away from mainstream journalism. Of course they are. It was kind of a huge eye-opener to me to see the YouTube world after having spent so much time in mainstream media and just seen all the cuts and kind of all the devastation. Because I'm like, we need to figure this out. And and Law and Crime is pretty willing to just put themselves on YouTube. I think a lot of channels, and the New York Times is big enough that I think they probably do have a YouTube channel, but they have their own video series on their own website. But YouTube has become so big that for a lot of organizations, it's a good revenue source. And I'm sure Law and Crime is making a pretty good revenue source off all the streams that it does on there. So it's kind of just a matter of, figuring out how to do that yourself, but still keep what makes you you. Because I mean, when you look at Armand Wiggins' site, I mean, somebody asked, they're like, why did they put backwards 3s when he wrote arrested? Because he was talking about somebody being arrested. He's got arrested in big letters, and yeah, it's no E's, it's the backward 3s. And I mean, it's kind of just the shock jock value, but I've also just been told that YouTube rewards that stuff. It's the algorithm that they're trying to hit, because to get 300,000 subscribers like Armand has, it takes time, and you've got to just kind of hit the algorithm juice on that. So you've got this kind of sensationalism like being rewarded. And I've started my own channel because just not to respond to some of this stuff, but I just kind of figured if they're putting my name out there, and as the saying goes in the hip hop world, they're using my name for clout, I need to, I should at least have a presence on there to try to do it. But I mean, right now it hasn't taken off at all, like anything like these YouTube shock jockers. And I'm not willing to kind of sacrifice my values or my journalism to try to build up a big following like that. If it happens, it happens. But I mean, the Tory Lanez traffic is just so huge that the fact that his sentencing isn't for another month gives me a big opportunity. But I also just remind myself that the reason people started following my coverage and they like my coverage is somebody sent me an email last night saying that I make the law really accessible. So I'm like, oh, if I can keep doing that, and I think that's the key to good legal affairs journalism. And I would have that thought when I was at the Daily Journal, although I feel like the Daily Journal is more accessible than some of the law.com stuff. I just would think these are such interesting topics, but they write it in such a dry way. You'll see that with Bloomberg News and just kind of the dryness of it. They kind of strip all life out of it, and it steers people away from the mainstream. But it also, I think it almost makes it look like this kind of just elite fortress that just isn't accessible to people at all. That it's just the court system that they're not a part of, and they're not a lawyer. So what do you know? And I've seen this with the Tory Lanez case, because I should say, first of all, no, I'm not a lawyer. My dad was a lawyer. My uncle was a lawyer. I grew up around the law, but no, I don't have a law degree. I'm by background a journalist. But sometimes I say to people, I'm like, no, I'm not a lawyer. I'd like to think if I was a lawyer, I'd be practicing law. I mean, these people you see on YouTube who are passing themselves off as legal experts, that kind of thing. I think there's such a danger right now with the legal community of just the saturation of that, because there's so much cable news and just round the clock coverage that they need content. They need people on there to fill their time. So, I mean, Tory Lanez had a lawyer. He's not his lawyer anymore, but he was advertising himself as this renowned rappellate expert. I mean, he's been a lawyer since December 2017. I mean, is he a renowned rappellate expert? And some of this attorney advertising, I think I've talked about this with people before. It gets into the area of ethics, because it's like, when are you being unethical by putting yourself out as a renowned appellate attorney when you've only done 4 appellate cases and you lost every one of them? I mean, what? I mean, and I feel like, especially with the death of traditional journalism and the rise of attorney advertising, we're seeing that a lot. And I think mainstream legal affairs outlets share some responsibility for that. I think we see a lot of people kind of breaking through that. I think like Law 360 is doing a lot of great coverage on the Girardi case right now, but it is just so oversaturated with PR. I mean, it's so much legal affairs journalism is just basically basically PR and advertising and not giving any kind of like good perspective by this. And I'm afraid that it's like giving rise to predatory lawyers, or lawyers like, you know, who have been lawyers since 2017, has no experience in the appellate court, and convinces his client it's a good idea to file a motion to recuse the judge. And then he's going to file an appellate writ to recuse the judge and charge him $90,000 for it. And as a legal affairs journalist, sometimes I think the base criticism or the base questioning of somebody who would question an attorney like that is, well, you're not a lawyer. It's like, well, okay. I mean, the lawyers just have this kind of mystique to them where, oh, well, he's a lawyer. He knows what he's doing. And it's like, there's just so many different types of lawyers and so many different cases that I think there's a need for watchdogging, but then also just the profession kind of toning it down a little bit in the shameless self-promotion. I mean, I went on LinkedIn and saw, it was during the Titan, the submersible thing, which that was just crazy. But somebody listed all the lawyers that he'd gotten TV spots for. Said, hey, anyone looking for more publicity, basically, and listed it all. It's like, you know, people died on that. I mean, I don't know. It's just kind of, I mean, it's all about, I mean, for some people, it really does just seem all about ego and making money. And I mean, the background that I came from, I was wanting to put together a YouTube talk with Justin. He was my Daily Journal colleague who covered a lot of the DWP reporting, the Department of Water and Power that's going on. There's a state bar investigation, the city attorney's office. There were some federal indictments. It's a really complex case, but I was going to talk to Justin about the fact that early in the talk, we should promote the fact and just be upfront about the fact that this world is not a world that we grew up in. I mean, Justin's from Connecticut. I grew up in Corvallis, Oregon. I mean, the world of $40,000 a year private schools, some people have multiple kids in these $40,000 a year private schools. I mean, it's just, and I think the legal profession is just so saturated in that. And with the self-promotion that goes on. I mean, I just see a lot of room for more mainstream knowledge and coverage of the legal affairs profession. But like I said, I'm not sure how we do that when mainstream media is dying so much, and people like, you know, Armand Wiggins are more interested in Ice Spice than legal affairs. But it's also something to be said that, I mean, we've always had people like the YouTube shock jockers, and somebody like Armand he's not a legal affairs journalist. He's an entertainment media personality. And, you know, the world in America has always had people like that who were only focused on the new entertainer and the new singer. And the fact that people like that have been able to thrive online and find their niches is great. And we shouldn't try to discredit them just because professional journalists and mainstream journalists haven't been able to figure it out themselves. It's just, how do we learn from each other? And hopefully we can all kind of figure out that we have something to learn from each other. When, you know, the LA Times is decimating the newspaper, and, you know, they can't get any kind of interactions on any of their online stuff, but they have at least, you know, respect and integrity, whereas the YouTuber gets 55,000 streamers in 2 minutes, but he's, you know, then he gets sued for defamation. But that's actually one thing that we've seen, and there's an Orange County connection to it, because Cardi B went on trial in Orange County for a lawsuit over her album art. Somebody was suing her for likeness misappropriation because his tattoo was portioned on there, and her lawyer from Atlanta who questioned her didn't do a lot of the trial, but actually has a pretty big win under her belt against a YouTuber in Atlanta federal court called Tasha K. It was a defamation case against Tasha K. And what we're seeing with the rise of these YouTubers and the popularity is, are we seeing a rekindling of valid defamation claims? And it was upheld by the appellate court. But there was a jury trial in Atlanta for a woman Tasha K, who, when I first learned about her from Cardi B's lawyer, it was kind of cast off as, oh, she's just a, I'd never heard of her. It just sounded like some, brought up her YouTube channel. I mean, she's got more subscribers than Armand Wiggins. I mean, she's got millions of views on there. She's making a lot of money off this, and she's got a huge audience, but she was been spreading lies about Cardi B for like really vicious, malicious stuff for the last like year or so. And or maybe longer than that, but it was a jury in Atlanta federal court returned, I think it was like a $4 million verdict against her, and upheld by the appellate court. And Tasha K doesn't have any money to pay it. She's trying to claim bankruptcy, but Cardi B has gone on Twitter and said that they're gonna bankrupt her so much that her kids never go to college or something. But she's really made the point that it's almost a symbolic thing. It's not the money. They're just trying to shut her down. But also Lisa, in her, I think the Cardi B's lawyers, is making a move for some of her YouTube revenue, because I don't have any insight into what exactly it is, but once you get up into million subscribers, you've got hundreds of thousands of views, they're making serious revenue off of it. So like I said, when you've got the LA Times selling the San Diego Union Tribune, laying off their entire digital desk, and all the employees are out protesting in the streets with their signs, it's like, well, Armand Wiggins can just turn on his live right now and get 55,000 streamers. So how can we all learn from each other? And where does legal affairs journalism come into that? And I think what's interesting about it is I feel like there's more interest in that than ever before, because we've got there's a woman, Emily Baker, who she was a former Los Angeles deputy DA for maybe like 18 months or something, but she has a huge following on YouTube. She probably has, I'm not sure how many subscribers, but definitely a huge like personality, because she is knowledgeable about the law, and she explains these mainstream celebrity cases that you see. She's talking in legalese, but explaining it in terms. So it was one thing that really encouraged me to do it myself was, I mean, these people are just covering the trials that you see everywhere else. If somebody is actually going out in court, LA federal court, covering stuff that nobody sees, it's like, how can I get my own medium to try to utilize that? But of course, one advantage they have is just by covering stuff online and not leaving, they don't have the travel time. They have their own home studio all set up. But anyway, I kind of feel like I've just been rambling here, but I wanted to talk about the idea of how I find stories, and so much of it is just kind of trying to have a pulse on what people are interested in. But like I said, if I had just been focused on what I thought people were interested in before this Tory Lanez case started, I'd never even heard of Tory Lanez before. I'd heard of Meghann Thee Stallion, but I had no idea how much actual interest there was in the case. So I think sometimes you have to kind of experiment around with things just to kind of see what works. But I remember a editor back in Idaho years ago had a theory. It didn't last very long. I think the other editors squashed it, but he was saying, I mean, how many stories do you actually read in the newspaper every day? His idea was that maybe we can just focus on writing 1 or 2 really good stories a day and having it in the paper. And then I think it was like, no, actually you got to fill all this space. But I've kind of tried to think about that when I do legal affairs and trials.com, because I don't want to just cover everything that everyone else covers, kind of the eating yourself alive regurgitation that you see, and just putting something out to put something out. It's like want to have something be a little bit more thoughtful. So I've tried to, especially with the email list building, I said I want every story that's sent out to be something that's thoroughly reported, and maybe it's centered on an LA audience, like the LA corruption case or the Mark Ridley Thomas case. But I'd like to think that somebody in Ohio who's not a lawyer could also pick up the article and read it and learn something about this case, learn something about the legal system or something like that. So I've kind of just got a bunch of different cases that I track. And that's one great thing with the internet is we probably all heard of Pacer alerts, but there's courtlistener.com allows me to get notifications for all different sorts of cases. But it's kind of just a matter of keeping an ear out, and then trying to just trying to talk to people. They said good journalism is always about talking to people. So it's about networking and just going to events and that kind of thing. But really, and one thing I've always been kind of proud of is some people will ask me, they're like, how did you find out about this? And I said, I just looked at the court calendar. I mean, people kind of assume that somebody must have tipped me off to this case. It's like, yeah, somebody tipped me off to this case. The clerk who types the court calendar and puts it on the public docket, like, and that was the case that I'm covering now. And as soon as this is over, I'm going to go up to the Santa Ana federal courthouse because the jury's deliberating. But I saw it on Fred Slaughter's docket, because even if I'm not, even if I don't have a free day, like if there's a hearing scheduled and I see it, I'm not going to be able to go to it. I'll still look at the calendars, because you just find out about a lot of cases and you can write down a case and look it up for later. But he had a case that was filed in 2016. And that was what first caught my attention, because people talk about how slow the court system is. But I'm like, usually we don't have cases going back that far right now. So I looked it up, and it's a civil rights case. A guy who was wrongfully convicted of murder, and it was actually passed around to a couple different judges. Well, it was originally with Judge Riel, Judge Manny Riel, before he died. And it looks like it was probably the last case that the Ninth ever kicked him out of. But it went to Judge Wilson, who then sent it to Judge Slaughter as kind of a welcoming gift. But it's a wrongful conviction case. I mean, nobody denies that he was in prison for 13 years for a murder he didn't commit. It's just a matter of who is actually liable for this. And he's bringing malicious prosecution claims against the police on it. But when I looked it up, I was amazed that it had never gotten any kind of coverage. I mean, they'd never covered the fact that he'd been exonerated on this. And the reason I found out about it was just looking at the court calendar. So that's how it's happened with the Tory Lanez case too, is just kind of keeping up on that. And one thing, sometimes there's just so many different things going on. It's kind of getting a coverage plan for it, and just realizing that just because a story maybe is a couple of days after something happened, I've kind of, law and crime news would never allow that. They want something instantaneous, but I've kind of realized that not everyone just lives in the moment. So if a story's, as long as it's thorough and complete, I mean, if it's a couple of days after the fact, I don't think we should, I don't think that's going to scare away too many readers. But one case that's going on is the Stephen Beale trial that Judge Staten is doing in Los Angeles, the bombing trial. It's a priority case with the Department of Justice, because it was Alyssa Viejo salon. He's accused of blowing up his ex-girlfriend. It was all over the news in 2018 because it was a huge explosion. It was a fatal explosion. I think the LA TV stations did like round the clock coverage all day. But somebody asked me why it wasn't just a Superior Court case. And it's because it was such a complex case that the guy he was testifying yesterday, I think he's still on the stand today. He's the main bomb investigator, has done bombing investigations all over the world, like the Atlanta. But it was so high tech, they needed somebody like that in there. So that trial is going to be going on for maybe another month or so. And one thing that dictates how I cover things is whether electronics are allowed. And the LA courts, and part of it is just, I think, the way the courtrooms are. If people are familiar with the courtrooms in the Santa Ana federal courthouse and the LA federal courthouse, the acoustics are so much more sensitive in the LA courthouses. Like if you're in the gallery on a laptop, it might be a little bit more noticeable. But I also just think it's judges being a little bit stuffy and not opening themselves up to what's going on with journalism today, because the LA judges really do not allow laptops in court. In Santa Ana, I mean, I don't even have to ask to take out my laptop in Judge Carter's courtroom or Judge Selna's courtroom or Judge Carney's courtroom. He's leaving soon, by the way, but or Judge Slaughter's courtroom. But LA is just completely off limits. You can't have your phone out or anything. And it's my dream to hold some kind of bench bar press thing where we actually talk about this. I've said that if we want somebody to talk about how that should never be allowed, and he'll never do it, we can get Judge Walter to be on the panel. But Judge Wu once allowed me to use my laptop for note-taking purposes, because I think if we really make you're cutting off so much access to a trial. The reason learned so much about covering trials and really got into it at the Daily Journal was because Judge Guilford would just let me use my laptop in court. So when the insider trading trial was going on with Skadden Arps defending James Mazo, and we had the baseball player Doug DeSense on trial, it was like a 2.5-month trial. And of course, the Daily Journal was interested in coverage of openings and coverage of major witnesses, but it's not like I could just go to the trial have that be the only thing I cover for 2.5 months. So fortunately, because I could use my laptop in there, I was able to go in there and keep an ear on the trial and work on other stories. But when you can't use your laptop in court, you're just completely shut out of that. So a lot of the trials up in LA, like the Beale trial, is one that I would like to watch a little bit more of than I think I'm going to, but I can't use my laptop in there. So I mean, to just sit in there for 6 hours and listen to the bomb technician testify, I mean, it's not worth it for what you're going to get for a story. But I am hoping to go up there. I want to be there for the verdict, because especially this is a second trial. It was a hung jury on the last one. So I figured that would be a good way to cover it, to cover closings, and then have a big story that I send out right after the verdict happens. Because it's kind of still a matter of figuring out how to manage that email list too. I mean, do I send too many emails? Am I going to scare people away if I, email them too much, that kind of thing? But I've kind of just decided I just need to email the news as it comes. And if people unsubscribe, they unsubscribe, because I want good committed subscribers on there. But it's kind of just a matter of, yeah.
Yes, we're at the top of the hour.
Oh,
And
yeah.
as fascinating as it all is, we've promised our loyal audience to begin on time and end on time every week. So one final comment. I know sometimes you report on cases settling, and every time I read about a settlement, I ask myself, has there been a mediator involved in that? And so my pitch to journalists everywhere is, when a mediator has been involved, please give the mediator credit in the press reporting about the settlement, because whoever that mediator is has probably done a lot of good, hard work and contributed to that result. And
Absolutely.
So with that 2 cents worth, let me thank you very much for a very deep and insightful look into the world of legal affairs journalism. I hope that people will be able to contribute to the Family Assistance Ministry. That's www.lovefam.org, lovefam.org. And of course, your Substack, Legal Affairs and Trials, is well worth a subscription. I'm a subscriber myself. I hope many others will be as well. I find it very informative. And with that, let me thank you once again. Natalie, thank you. And with that, we are complete.